This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest UCTV programs.
Great to join you here on the stage and have this conversation with one of California's preeminent leaders in climate protection, Senator Fran Pavley. So Senator Pavley, for most of you, probably doesn't need much introduction, but I'm going to give her one because she's one of my heroes. And I followed her career from the day she started in the legislature, which was in 2000 when she got elected to the Assembly. Prior to that, she had served in local government in the council and as mayor of Agora Hills. But when she got elected to the State Assembly, I was running a project called Cities for Climate Protection with an organization that I started, ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. And we were, of course, engaged with getting cities to look at how they contributed to GHG emissions and also how their decisions around waste, water, energy, land use, and transport affected each you and my GHG emissions. And of course, transportation was one of the big bugaboos. So what did Senator Pavley, as the Assembly member, as a freshman, do but introduce 1493, which was the first measure to try to get around this absurdity in the federal government that wouldn't allow for new CAFE standards. So Fran brilliantly came up with this way to get at tailpipe emissions without doing CAFE standards. And of course, it's the history is never been, well, all of our cars are better as a result. Yes. Our air is better, our climate is better. And then Senator Pavley went on to do well, a couple other bills in there, but we'll jump to AB 32 in 2006, which is California's landmark global warming solutions bill. And then Senator Pavley was elected to the state Senate in 2008, and she and I both authored the bill, it was SB 11 and AB 8, to continue the $2 billion in investment in fuel technology initiatives and air quality programs that was otherwise going to lapse at that time. Senator Pavley's also done bills on fracking, and right now she's engaged in trying to I don't want to say reauthorize, but in effect, AB 32 has a goal that goes to 2020. So after that point, yes, we have executive orders, but perhaps California needs to legislatively set a new goal. So SB 32, which is in the legislature right now, would set a goal of, had two goals in it, 40% below 1990 levels by 2030 and 80% below 1990 by 2050. So those are some of the things that Senator Pavley's is in the midst of right now, and she's got about a year left in her term. So we're going to keep wishing you well, and we're going to let you start with a few comments to our participants, and then I'm going to ask you some questions that I think that go along with the theme of what we've been talking about for the last day and a half. Senator Pavley.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure for me to be here. Absolute pleasure to be in La Jolla. I usually, if I can find a way to get here for some legitimate reason. It's a gorgeous day outside. I know there's an ocean behind me, but I try not to get up and go look at that. It's actually my third time here. The UC system and UCSD and Scripps in particular has been engaged in the climate discussion. And since I've been in the legislature, we had a session or a conference many, many years ago talking about impacts to California on climate change. I remember Dr. Wilkerson coming down from the Brin School of UCSB. We had people from Scripps talking about sea level rise earlier, Mel, on this year, and snowpack and the link between climate change and air pollution and exacerbating health problems like asthma. That's when, in 2001, until we were trying to make the case that even though climate change is a global problem, the impacts facing California will be real. And I would say to you, Nancy, that one of my surprises is some of these impacts are happening sooner than I ever guessed, and that was just 14 or so years ago. It seemed to be accelerating. Also had an amazing workshop here, or I guess it was a hearing about maybe 6, 7 years ago. It was on national security. We started talking about climate change as a national security risk, and at the time we had the commander of Pendleton here, the Western Regional head of the Navy was here, talking about the national security risks as it relates to climate change. Here were military people with their uniforms, ribbons on, everything, talking about global warming. Republicans in general couldn't talk about it, but somehow all the top military brass could as a global national security risk, mass migrations and movement of people due to drought. And the military, I soon learned, is in like the insurance business. They measure risks, and they put this right up at the top. And the military bases in California, it's been amazing. They've met and exceeded, in many cases, AB 32. Now, there's something to be said about someone just giving orders, and it's done. I'm very jealous about that. We have this political sort of thing we do up in Sacramento. So I think of Scripps as a good home for discussion of climate change issues right here. And Nancy, I should be moderating your discussion, or you can moderate mine, but let's have a conversation on where we move forward. We have similar backgrounds. She's been engaged longer than I have through her good work with ICLEI. We need her back in the legislature, I can say that, because we need those voices. We have 120 legislators. This is just a political commentary for a minute. No one, let's see, 4 people are left in the Senate who were around when AB 32 passed in 2006. Not one person in the 80-member assembly was around when AB 32 passed in 2006, not one. So the institutional memory is minimal. People come up there for a variety of reasons. This may not be their area of expertise. So my one sort of homework assignment, if you will, I'm a former middle school teacher, so I tend to talk in homework assignment terms, is meet some of those new assembly people going up there, or brand new senators if they haven't been in the assembly. Let them know your opinion on climate change and some of the challenges and opportunities we have together as a state. I thought the governor was very articulate talking about the challenges. One of our challenges is we've got 120 policy makers up there, 80 assembly members, 40 state senators, and we constantly need to remind ourselves to go back and talk about why we do this and the lessons learned. And as the governor articulated, it hasn't been a choice between a healthy economy and a healthy environment. It's actually, we've been successful at both. And for our state to move forward sustainably, we've got to do this. We've got to engage. We're seeing success stories. We know about the impacts and challenges. So just my 1 or 2 comments is historically, I always like to put in perspective, and I think you touched on it, Nancy. California is a unique place. We have 2 or 3 agencies that are really second to none. Our Air Resources Board and our Energy Commission, and to some extent our PUC as well, but they're there. They are the institutional memory. They're the ones, these policies that they'll have to implement over decades of periods of time. Legislators will come and go. Governors will come and go. I've been in the climate change world since, well, 2001 or 2, and I've served under 3 governors. If it wasn't for Governor Davis, the Clean Car Law, AB 1493, would never have been signed. Right. And we know that California has a unique position under the Federal Clean Air Act that we can pass more stringent air pollution standards than the federal government. Other states have 2 options: adopt California standards or go with the weaker federal standards. We've been able to keep that exemption, not that some people in Washington have thought about taking that away, but we have that exemption in place. Why? Because our Air Resources Board and the federal government, because of our non-attainment areas, required that we do something about our smog and air pollution. So we predated the Federal Clean Air Act. That's why we have an exemption. That's why we're in this discussion. We would not be here today without that exemption. That's critically important. And then fast forward to 2007, the Supreme Court decision that you had mentioned, Massachusetts versus the Environmental Protection Agency, where on a 5-4 decision with Anthony Kennedy probably being the 5th vote, I would assume, from California, saying that we could measure greenhouse gas emissions just like typical criteria air pollutants under the Clean Air Act. When you think about that today, that law allowed California's clean car standards then becoming the de facto national standards, coupled with President Obama's leadership in granting California a waiver under the Clean Air Act, which we need to implement new, higher, more stringent standards. That had become a national policy, married with the CAFE policy, the Department of Transportation fuel efficiency policy. California cannot, I have to correct you one, cannot, because I've taken that out of my vocabulary, we cannot measure fuel efficiency standards.
Right,
that would be
right.
illegal.
Correct.
That would
Correct.
be wrong.
Correct.
We can reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions coming from the tailpipes of automobiles through a variety of technologies. And back when that bill passed in 2002, these were off-the-shelf technologies like variable valve timing and more efficient air conditioners, the list goes on. So the concept behind that policy is now a national policy. We're seeing a broader choice of vehicles. And the oil companies who did spent so much money confusing the public on commercials and full-page ads during this campaign to take the 50% reduction off the fuel side.
In Senator Pavley's co-authored bill with our Senate Pro Tem Kevin De Leon, SB 350.
Yeah, so spent so much time doing that. I got out my old clean car standard opposition, the full-page ads, exact same talking points. Yeah. Exact same. I would show them to my fellow assembly members. Hey, look, this is 2002. It's the same arguments. Gas prices are going to go up. We're going to tax how much your gas prices will go up. We will limit the amount you can drive. You won't be able to choose the kind of car you want, and the list goes on. Same exact thing. So history does matter. What the federal government is doing today under Obama's leadership on clean power laws and emissions, all from that Supreme Court decision, it matters. And then the passage of AB 32, which was a multi-sector approach, and we can talk about it, has been amazingly successful. And I wanted to give a shout out, but she might have left, to Bonnie Reese, who was instrumental with Governor Schwarzenegger in moving that along. So I've had the ability to serve under 3 different governors. These policies have survived the changes of administrations, the changes of legislators. So Nancy can, I'm going to pass the torch to Nancy, figuratively speaking. She can pick up the mantle in the state Senate next year.
Good. Well, let's get into some discussion. So you mentioned that, and I'm going to elaborate a little on the Bill 1493, the car bill, that it initially, of course, was California acting only, yet as Byron has referred, it sent a market signal, and since California is the largest purchaser of vehicles, most of the auto manufacturers conformed their models for the whole country. So even before President Obama had acted, in effect, California's legislation impacted the entire country's tailpipe emissions. So let's turn to 32, AB 32. It's been discussed somewhat, or let's put it a different way. There's been many speakers who so far in this day and a half have referred to California's leadership and how much progress we've made. But let's be specific and hear from you, Senator Pavley, about what's the progress from your point of view that we've made so far with AB 32?
Okay, that's speaking in broader terms. AB 32 is a complement of quite a few policies, some that have been in place and are in statute. Our renewable portfolio standard from 20% to 33%, now it'll eventually be 50%. That's in separate statute, which is critically important. The clean car law is in statute. That's another 17, 18% reductions of greenhouse gas emissions. We also have done amazing work, we collectively speaking, in energy efficiency. Probably as controversial as the clean car law because of California's leadership, we become the de facto national standard, was 30 years ago, refrigerators. That was the big fight. Should we have energy efficiency requirements in refrigerators? They were the energy hogs of yesterday. The Energy Commission did amazing work, came up with these new standards. Now everyone has more energy efficient refrigerators across the US and all over the world, frankly. Those companies that made those refrigerators were horribly opposed to that. Yes. So change is hard. So what, in my mind, the different policies, the suite of policies and what we call a scoping plan under AB 32, what's really helped, frankly, is the cap on emissions. The cap on emissions and rollback to 1990 levels sent a clear market signal for people that California is serious when it comes to making these changes. They had the knowledge that these policies are put in statute. And so over $30 billion of private sector money came to California since the passage of AB 32 in 2006. And the UC system is part of that success story because of what they were doing. It also made California this place for innovation and attracted the private capital investment. I met with the CEOs of all the major solar companies in California, and they said, not too long ago, we wouldn't be here today in California without your policies. The renewable portfolio standard, the cap on emissions and rollback, that's what's been the incredible success story. So in every legislator's district, you can find new businesses that have been here in the last 10 to 15 years that would not have been here without these policies and bills. So I can give a simple story on how things have changed. We had an all-out fight doing the renewable portfolio standard in 2003, I think it was.
The 20%.
20%. Utilities, strongly opposed, right? Absolutely opposed. I don't think we had decoupling then. I could be wrong, but it was about that time where we decoupled energy profits, and so a different kind of loading order where you invested first in renewables.
We had decoupling, but
everything
that's okay.
like that.
We had dereg.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that was incredibly important. So they opposed it. Now they've met and exceeded those targets. By the time we got to 33% on the floor of the Senate, this is where the partisanship sort of melted away. We had 4 Republican senators stand up and talk about they were in favor of a 33%. The utilities were in favor of a 33%. Right. This is a different world now.
Yes.
And why were these senators who normally were making climate change a partisan issue, why were they in favor of it? Because these solar companies were in their districts, providing jobs in their districts. Now, if you can clean up the air and provide jobs and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, all is good in the world. Right. You know, everyone is supporting those policies. So good success stories. Yes. Market signal, market signal, market signal.
So let's turn to UC, but right before we do, since you brought it up and it's been brought up a little less, we've talked about the economy benefits to California's policies and the job creation and such, but the last time I checked and looking at numbers of investment, venture capital investment in the clean energy space, California gets about 60% of the investment in all of North America in that space, California alone. So thank you, Senator Pavley, for sending those good signals. Now, we're gathering here of UC folks primarily, not only, but talk a little bit about how important What's been the role of our public university system in assisting California in our developing and meeting the goals, but also just in general the role of UC in this space of climate leadership?
Incredibly important, because when you talk to people from out of state or thinking about investing in California, they do it because of our educational institutions. Yes, they love the beach as well, but the educational institutions and the investment potential. Many of our UCs, I believe, have incubators going on campus where they can scale up and become profitable businesses that attract that kind of investment dollar. We have gotten a very good synergy going with the UC system in particular. And I was looking at the posters outside, but I do know, for example, at UCLA, which is closest one to my district, they're doing some amazing work, not only at adaptation and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, but working towards carbon neutrality. They have a long way to go, but if you can accomplish anything in Los Angeles, actually, that is a good model for anywhere else. So becoming more sustainable when it comes to mobile emissions, getting people out of their cars, investing in transit, smart growth strategies. And in Los Angeles area, what's really sort of intriguing all of us right now in our 4th year of record drought is really looking at water sustainability in conjunction with sustainability in energy, because 20% of all the energy we use is moving, treating, and heating water. And if you're from Southern California, you're importing a lot of water that requires a lot of energy. So developing more regional sustainability programs in relation to water is something that UCLA and other campuses, especially if you're in Southern California, are working very, very hard on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm now part-time at UC Davis, and I recall in January of this year, there was a gathering that was hosted by the governor's office and I believe CARB, where a number of the different UC campuses came and presented their models, which CARB is now relying on. It's a whole set of models that are projecting what California's growth in greenhouse gas emissions, our growth in energy use, but then also running different scenarios of 50% reduction, 80% reduction, how those could be achieved, and what ways to achieve it that have good economic results. And so it was day long, and it had not all the UC campuses were represented, but the majority, and it was very, very impressive.
We've relied a lot on Davis's expertise. I think it's Dr. Sperling.
Yes, Sperling, Sperling, who's on Resources Board
transit
additionally.
And passenger. He did a lot of our work in trying to model how you can make cars more energy efficient, and what we're really trying to work on. I think UC Davis, coupled with UC Riverside, is doing some very good work on reducing diesel and criteria air pollutants in freight.
Right.
It's huge in Southern California.
And also
our
at
ports.
UCLA at the port
Yep.
of LA. So we know that our agencies, California's agencies, rely on research from our different campuses in the, we, meaning us legislators, we give them the policy direction, but then it's our agencies that have to figure out how to implement it, and they rely on our good public university for much of the background research.
Don't tell them our secret. Lots of times, like the car bill and AB 32 are like, I'm looking at Bonnie, like 10 pages long. It's not
Right.
like Congress that wordsmiths every line in the law.
Yes.
Because we have these agencies that can take these targets or goals and objectives and implement them in a very thoughtful manner. And we've been able to survive a lot of litigation that way as well. They're never arbitrary standards. They're actually based on the science.
On the science, yes, that we rely on.
What's an
UC and
interesting
others.
concept.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting to have policy that is driven by science, since that doesn't tend to be the norm in all government. We could talk about this one for much longer, but we also know that there's a lot of the products and technologies that now, while most of our legislation and California's policies have been technology neutral, the technologies that have emerged that many of us are relying on have come out of they've been products brought to market from our different UC systems also, which is quite campuses rather. So now let's jump over to how far can we get with regulation, and so the balance between regulation and market measures, your perspective on that.
You know, that was not an easy discussion to have in Sacramento, right? Many of our environmental groups would like a straight regulatory approach. Other people wanted it completely free market system out there. We've had a combination of approaches that have worked fairly well together. Some are regulatory, some are market-based driven, providing that flexibility. For AB 32, about 20% of the reductions or so, we use it as a backstop on AB 32, are from cap and trade system. And that has done a lot of good things. It has sent not only signals that big businesses can invest in energy efficiency, and by putting a price on carbon, if they exceed those reduction targets that we would have been required to do under a regulatory approach, they now have something of value to trade with other businesses who can't meet the targets. So we're seeing some businesses really step up and doing some amazing things because there's value in it. Putting a price on carbon has been incredibly helpful. So cap and trade has been successful in that way. We still have, in some cases, some businesses that have a very hard time meeting their reduction targets. AB 32 applies to about 350 of our major, most significant emitters in California, but still in areas like food processors or cement industries that are very carbon intensive, we're having a difficult time trying to figure out how to help them invest in energy efficiency to reduce their exposure. We've sometimes, in some cases, CARB has done some free allowances or reduction strategies. There is no point in chasing some of these businesses across the state line and have them operating there. So it's a difficult challenge. Now, one of the benefits from cap and trade is people are given allowances, and if they're not able to make their reduction targets, they have to pay for their allowances. We are starting to see the benefits of large sums of money that we can reinvest into reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But I wanted to share with all my friends in the UC world. It's a challenge because cap and trade, it's a fee, and a fee means that it's got to mitigate the climate pollution from the entity that's polluting it. Right? It has to be a direct mitigation. So
what we call the nexus.
It's called, and that's illegally challengeable. And in fact, we've been sued on this. Is that a fee or a tax? Why does that matter? Well, a fee is direct mitigation to pollution. For example, if fuels are under the cap, you could argue, well, you could use then some of the proceeds from the sale of the auctions from the refineries to investing in cleaner, lower carbon fuels. That would be a direct nexus, but in reducing any greenhouse gas emissions, that would be a nexus. It has to be quantifiable, it has to be permanent, enforceable, verifiable. You have to have a baseline. The other part of AB 32, the way the bill started that I wrote, was a mandatory reporting of all significant emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, so that we have that baseline and that we can quantify reductions. It's about record keeping, auditing, and all that. So a lot of people come into my office saying, boy, that cap and trade money, it's $3 billion or whatever it is. It can't be used in a lot of more flexible ways that we'd like to do, especially in the R&D world and other kinds of things, because how do you quantify those reductions? Mm-hmm. A fee has to mitigate pollution. You have to be able to measure it. Why can't it go to research and development? So the UC world would love to see more money in that. That is very hard to quantify that. So if it's not a fee and you don't have the nexus, then it becomes a tax. And in California, if it's a tax, it requires a 2/3 vote of each house of the legislature and the governor. Therein lies a big problem potentially. We've been trying to pass bills on 2/3 votes. We used to have to pass our budget on a 2/3 vote. That was always a challenge, the leveraging that goes on.
And
so
the last 2/3 vote bill that passed was SB 8 and AB 11.
That's true. But we just tried to pass in special section a transportation measure, raising some gas prices to help maintain our freeways and road systems that are crumbling in state and local governments. It's a very big challenge. So that's why we're so very careful on expenditure of auction proceeds because of that legal nuance. I found out other states, taxes pass on a simple majority vote. California, because of Prop 13, has put these hurdles and barriers in. Some people like that, but it's problematic in implementation of some of these strategies.
So I would love to talk more about cap and trade and where some of those dollars might go, but I'm going to jump to a different subject and maybe we can come back to it. So the subject I want to jump to, it's come up a number of times here in our discussions, is so let's say UC meets its carbon neutral goal, and let's say California even meets its 50% or 80% reduction. We know that our total emissions are a drop in the bucket globally. So why should California and UC be pursuing these goals? Why should we be doing this?
There's so many good reasons. Sometimes when I talk to, I had redistricting and I'm in a half Republican district now, so I have to talk about things in all sorts of ways. Let's say this climate change stuff, we turned out it's all wrong. There's no such thing as climate change. Let's just say, boy, doesn't energy efficiency make sense anyway? Isn't it smarter to have a more fuel efficient car that saves money at the pump? The public here all gets air pollution. They don't want it and the health impacts there. So almost all our policies make sense anyway. Sustainability makes sense anyway. But California, by just having 1 out of every 8 Americans living in California, we become the de facto leader, whether it's energy efficient appliances, building standards, clean cars. It becomes a national policy. Then you start making a dent in the global emissions, right? Mm-hmm. California adopts our standards. You can go anywhere in the country now today. I met a gentleman who was Chinese engineer, and we're trying to think, well, what does it matter what we do when China's emitting so many emissions? He says, and they all come to Sacramento into our agencies to learn about things. He said, we wouldn't have catalytic converters in our car today in China if it wasn't for California. So when you start stepping outside of your own state and other countries, it does make a tremendous difference. So modeling and being able to dispute that false choice of a healthy environment versus a healthy economy by showing that even during a recession, clean technologies was our one bright spot, and now we're, the 7th biggest economy in the world again. We have to do this smartly. We have to create the jobs that go with it. We have to help people transition from an old economy based on fossil fuels. It's complicated, but I think having that model is incredibly important. And back to that decoupling story, I didn't tell it very well, but we were one of the few states that had that just 15 years ago. Now 26 states have it. That's changed the dynamic of how people think. I think we have 35 states with a renewable portfolio standard. So sometimes the inaction on the national level is frustrating, but there's a lot of good things going on in other states. We have to do more. I know we can. And,
right. Well, and it's clearly, as we know, our policies have helped drive down the cost of renewables, for example. And it seems to me clearly both from the scalable solutions in bending the curve and UC itself, if achieving carbon neutrality, the research alone is something that then we're the preeminent research institution somewhat in the world. And so it's gonna drive either technologies or products or practices elsewhere in the world. And of course, the more deliberate we can be about that, the better, so that we don't just assume it by accident. The more deliberate we are, the better. But I agree with you. I think these things are we are not only benefiting our own economy and our own people and our own health and our own atmosphere, meaning air right here in California, we are benefiting the world. The question I want to ask now is, how does, there's much talk about environmental justice and the fact that many times when either we send a price signal, it disproportionately affects low-income people, or that we have some of our most polluted areas are areas where low-income people live. So how does environmental justice and equity fit in this, in California's policies and perhaps in our cap and trade expenditures?
It has to fit in all our policies. To be successful, it has to fit in. These policies have to be relevant to all zip codes in California. We have this discussion frequently, as you can imagine, up in Sacramento. Are these policies just going to make our energy costs go up? You know, our gas prices go up, and how does that disproportionately impact lower income people? But on the other side, I think people are understanding that disproportionately disadvantaged communities will be impacted because of climate change. So it is a careful balancing act, along with the jobs that go with it. Regarding cap and trade expenditures, 25% of all our auction proceeds will go to disadvantaged communities in areas of things like weatherization of homes. One of our biggest challenges will be existing buildings and multi-dwelling units. What would the world look like if we could weatherize all those homes and make them more energy efficient? How can we then reduce greenhouse gas emissions and put more disposable income in the hands of people who are on limited income? Utility bills are a significant part of your limited income. You pay for rent, you pay for food, and you pay for energy costs. Investing in all of that is consistent with Governor Brown's targets of reducing energy consumption by 50%. I would say a disproportionate share of all those proceeds on energy efficiency. And we're trying to get people out of their most polluting cars. We're seeing, I had authored a bill called Clean Cars for All, but we're seeing the ability for people to get in more fuel efficient internal combustion engine cars, and also trading up for a hybrid or even an electric car.
Right.
So all those things, when you have 120 legislators representing all different parts of California, these policies have to be relevant not only to the 120 legislators, but to all those people we represent. And as a small state of 39 million people, that's a challenge, but we can do it.
So let's see if there's a question for from the audience. Yes.
I have a question, Senator Pavley, about the electric industry. As we know, there's a sea change underway with regard to not just the electric utilities, but all of the transmission system, the fact that we now have distributed generation, possibly distributed storage, the questions of who has responsibility for load balancing and managing the system, and it's been commented that we need a new business model, and the electric utilities, of course, are recognizing this and struggling with it. What can we do to help advance that? Because it strikes me that that's an important element in moving beyond the question of 40% renewables to get up to 50% and ultimately higher. The challenges become greater. What are your thoughts about that in terms of how we can help accelerate that process?
Maybe Nancy and I will both answer it, but I think you're going to see even more investment by the PUC and the utility sector now that under SB 350, the implementation of the electric car standards will all be done through the PUC, not through the Air Resources Board. So you're going to see a greater play. I was struck by the fact that in Europe, just got back from Europe, everyone measures renewables differently. They measure renewables, everything but fossil fuels. So all of hydro, all of nuclear, everything. So they're up there. So we're having a real debate right now on and on about the cost of maintaining grids. Mm-hmm. Who would pay? I would say most people I know are investing in solar, or solar companies themselves want to make sure that we don't send the wrong market signal for that investment on especially single-family homes or rooftop solar in that way. So the maintaining the grid as we switch to a more site-based system is probably our biggest challenge. Nancy, this is your more, I'm going to turn it, that's more her world. I do mobile sources, energy.
Well, we already heard from, well, Governor Brown did a shout out for Southern California Edison where, or SDG&E actually, Southern California Edison is the one who bought the more storage. So they were only mandated a certain amount, which Byron referred to, but then tripled that, or more than tripled. SDG&E is now on track to get the 50% renewable by 2017. So now, clearly, they wouldn't be moving that way if they didn't feel that they had some ability to make sure the grid was reliable, because certainly any utility, you can't afford to have your customers having brownouts. So they feel some confidence about that. Now, statewide, if we were to jump to 50% by 2017, would we have that reliability? That's certainly what our ISO is dealing with. And I think the combination of the demand side activities that we're engaged in, the energy storage, and the different portfolio of renewables, and I think our utility companies embracing all of those things, along with the ISO embracing them, working together, we're going to achieve it, and we're going to have reliability. And I think what we really want, obviously, is that reliability and that achievement without having to dump lots of, extra generation. There's no, that's as big of a waste as, the reason we love energy efficiency is we don't want to waste energy. Same thing, we have obviously the capacity to generate lots of renewables, but we don't want to just dump it. So of course the benefit of electrification, whether it's in our transportation sector or the storage, is that we will capture that excess generation at any given time and be able to deploy it again when we need it. And that's the vision we have. And I wouldn't call myself the technical expert to say how I do it. I certainly can, I can both see that, I have that vision, I see it, and I want to very much assist in putting the policies into place, but I will rely on the technicians to do it. But I think we can do it. I know we can.
One bill that they're considering next year, it'll be the beginning of the discussion with the ISO and others, is opening up the whole western grid in the western states.
Right.
On being able to move wind power from whatever, South Dakota or wherever it's coming from, California, and move things around because of peak periods and everything else. Here's the challenge. We have a law in place that says we will not import any or have any more contracts that would allow coal to move into California.
Right.
We're not going to be able to control those electrons.
Right.
Carbon-based movement of wind power or solar from other states into California could be powered from coal. That's sort of an interesting discussion to have. So we're already in, in offices and things, meeting with all the players to figure out how that best could happen. But that would help us.
Well, we also have in place, a lot of people forget this bill, and we see if there's another question before it, but Senator Parada, when he was pro tem, put in a carbon coefficient in the purchase of electricity, which basically, it helped stop a bunch of coal plants from ever being built, and also one of the transmission lines from being built, because it said, basically, if you're an IOU, you can't purchase electricity with a certain carbon coefficient, which was coal, fully coal generated. So we, even independent of the more current policies put into place, that one was put in, I believe, 2007 or 8. So
it was an incredibly important signal,
Yes.
and LA was a city where 50% of their energy was coming from out-of-state coal. They're now down to about 25% because it's illegal to extend any more long-term contracts. It really sent a signal, and it would have been hypocritical for California to brag about being the climate change champions.
Right, if our policies were
if we're
driving
causing
coal.
all the out-of-state coal companies
Absolutely.
to expand.
Okay. All right. With that, we'll need to bring this session to an end. Senator, thank you for your service.
Thanks.